Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here's your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday morning, and thanks for joining us again for Faith in Our Hometown, our weekly conversation about things that matter to us as people of faith in the greater Joplin area. This morning, we're going to be talking a little bit about care for the planet. And you may be wondering why I would want to talk about bees in January. But we're going to talk a little bit about some of our local beekeepers about caring for the planet and the importance of bees in our ecosystem and in terms of the life that we lead. And so my guest this morning is going to be Don Biessel, who is with the Joplin, Greater Joplin Area Beekeepers Association. So if that topic interests you, and even if it doesn't, I think you should just grab yourself a cup of coffee, settle in, and we're going to be back after this Mercy Minute to talk a little bit about beekeeping. So grab that coffee, and we'll be right back after this Mercy Minute.
The dreaded tagged photo. I married the love of my life in October, and when I got home that night, I saw this. Frankly, this is every obese person's worst nightmare. You have no control, none, over what other people post. And up until that day, I'd been very careful about how I presented myself on social media. In fact, I generally only posted photos like this. What's sad is that I haven't always been like this. Confession, I've been a yo-yo dieter for roughly 10 years. When I met this amazing guy 3 years ago, he didn't care how much I weighed, but he did care about my health. A month after our wedding, I talked to my doctor and my journey began. Here's an honest and usually pretty entertaining look at how I got to bariatric surgery and beyond. Buckle up, check out my blog, Confessions of a Yo-Yo Dieter.
So again, thank you for joining us for another Sunday morning, Faith in Our Hometown. My guest this morning, Don Biessel, who's the president of the Joplin Area Beekeepers Association. Yep. So why, Don, do we, why would I do a show in January about bees?
This is actually the perfect time
to
start thinking about bees if you want to keep bees. Typically people will start keeping bees in April. That's usually when there are surplus bees available so that new beekeepers can start to keep their bees then. But you have to start thinking about keeping your bees in the wintertime before that. You need a fair amount of equipment. You need to figure out where you want to put your bees. You have to have somebody show you how to keep bees. So our association has year-round classes to teach people how to keep bees. We do that the first Tuesday of every month at 6 o'clock at the SMB building. It's free. Anybody can come. You don't have to be a member of the club.
You don't even have to be a beekeeper at this point in time. You may just be thinking about it.
Just if you're thinking about it. We have people show up who are thinking about it that actually don't end up keeping bees, but they learn a lot about them.
Sure.
And they end up being advocates for the bees.
So teach us a little bit about this morning about what's the importance of bees. Why do we need bees so much?
The bees that we keep actually aren't native to the Western Hemisphere. But there are many species of bees that are native to this hemisphere. They all came here with the European settlers, and we started keeping them, and they do pollinate our crops and food and help supply honey and so forth. But there are actually 20,000 species of bees in the world that help pollinate almost all our plants and all our food throughout the world.
Okay. So would we have been able to, just out of curiosity here, would we have been able to grow the things that we're currently growing now with some of the things that people brought if we hadn't brought the bees along to do it?
No. Primarily the fruit trees and a lot of the vegetables would not have been able to been pollinated here if we didn't bring bees. And the original settlers that brought bees brought German bees, and they're like smaller, darker bees. They're not very hospitable, meaning they're very defensive, what a lot of people refer to as aggression, but it's actually defensiveness. So it made them hard to work with. So they started bringing Italian bees and other species or races of bees from Europe over here to help do those tasks.
You don't know how many openings that gives me right now in terms of German versus Italian bees, and that the Italians are a little easier to get along with. I think that's very true in temperament too. I mean, being a German, in all fairness.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. Again, sometimes you don't think about the the history behind all this, or how things started, or how things changed, or whatever. So, what kind of bees do we kind of like have right now? More of these Italian, or descendants of the Italian bees, or?
Yeah, well, so most of the bees in the United States are what we call mutts. There's been a lot of intermixing. There are Italians, Carniolans, and Russians. Some of the, oh shoot, I'm going to forget what the name is. They come from a monk that was in England, the buckfast bees.
Okay.
And what happens is they can interbreed because bees open breed, but there are specific lines that are developed by bee breeders that have different attributes that go back to what the original bee species were like.
Interesting.
And of course, unfortunately, we have the Africanized bees. They got over to the Western Hemisphere in 1956. They were trying to breed better bees down in Brazil, and 6 of these Africanized queens escaped. And then Pandora's box was open, the bees were out, and they are hyper aggressive, and they don't behave as much like the other bees. They don't survive very well here, but in Central and South America, they have learned to work with them and deal with them.
Okay. So we don't really, that's not one of those things that we need to worry about, like, a science fiction movie being, written or something like that. Okay.
No, they really can't winter here. They winter in small clusters and move around a lot, and some of their genes for defensiveness have gotten into some strains, but that is very easy to breed out.
Oh, very good. So that's one of the things that bee breeders keep in mind is that they don't want overly defensive bees, if you will, because then they can seem to be more aggressive to just the curious onlooker or whatever.
Right. Our club actually deals with one specific bee breeder in Springfield, buzz bees. They very actively breed out a lot of the defensiveness and so forth, and we encourage people to go with a reputable breeder if they're going to start keeping bees, because the last thing somebody who's brand new with bees and might be apprehensive about them needs is very defensive bees. I mean, you usually end up...
It's difficult to deal with in terms of,
I mean, you usually end up getting stung once in a while when you keep bees. It's just part of the game, but you don't want bees as a new beekeeper that make you afraid to go out there, because it's just an amazing process to keep bees, watching how a hive grows and all the jobs that the different bees have and how the queen works and all of that. It's just amazing to see how that was created.
Well, let's go into that a little bit, because I mean, I'm kind of fascinated. I mean, I've done some breeding, but certainly not nearly enough. I just like to consume the products, from here in the area, which is good, the honey. But so what are some of the typical things that people who don't know anything would learn if they would come to, say, for your example, your beekeeping classes, or would think about getting into it? What are they going to learn about those different types of bees? Not the breeds necessarily, but the different roles that they have in the hive, and how all that works.
Well, I mean, the 3 most easily identifiable things you will notice in the hive is that the queen, the drones, and the workers all look very different from each other. The drones do not sting. They have great big eyes. They're a little bit bigger, and their only job is to eat and grow up and go off and mate with another queen. That's all they do. So this time of year, all the drones have been kicked out. They're a drag on the hive because nobody's breeding right now. There's only so much food, there's no nectar out there, so they kick all the drones out in the fall. And then the workers, they have several different jobs throughout their lifespan, depending on how old they are. And the first thing they start doing is by cleaning out the cell they came out of and starting to tend young. And that goes all the way up to being like undertaker bees, taking bees that have died out of the hive and guarding the front of the hive and going out and foraging. The foraging ones are usually among the older bees, and they work themselves to death, and that's it. And then the queen, she can live up to 5 years if she's mated really well. And what you'll really notice after you've watched bees for a long time is the queen's not in charge of hardly anything. It's the workers that drive everything. They can tell something that needs to be done, like if it's time to swarm, they will stop feeding the queen and they'll run her around in the hive so she loses weight and gets smaller so she can fly again. And they'll make the decision to go off and swarm. They'll decide if they need a new queen. So they tell her where to lay even. It's almost like a really well-functioning parish letting the pastor know where things need to go.
Well, I'd be happy to lose a little weight and let people tell me what to do for a little while, maybe a little while.
Can we run you around?
Yeah, maybe. That happens already. The running around happens already. So tell me about this swarming thing. So what you're saying then is that that's a time in the life of a hive where basically things are full or tapped out in that particular place or whatever, and then all of a sudden they have to go find a new place to live and set up shop?
Actually, they swarm when things are really good. A lot of people think of bees as this bee is the organism. But if you look at it in a big picture kind of way, each colony is an organism. And you think of all these jobs inside the hive as different organs in the body of, say, a mammal. The drones and the queen are responsible for reproduction, temperature regulation, and feeding, and growth, and food storage, and all these other things are taken care of by the workers. So when things are really good in the hive, there's a lot of bees, it's starting to get crowded, they have a lot of food, there's still food out there to be gathered, pollen and nectar and those things. That's the ideal time for that organism to reproduce. So they split off about 60% of the workers, and the old queen, they go off, and before they leave, the old queen lays some more workers that they feed special food. The workers feed special food to until they cap off the cell, and the hormones in that food make new queens. And the new queens emerge, and they decide who's going to be boss.
So I'm going to ask, I'm afraid I know the answer to this question. So there's really only one queen in a hive.
There can sometimes be two, that's an exception, but yeah, usually it's just one.
So those 5 or 6 that they cap off and put in their little incubator to make a new queen, so they basically wait for all 5 or 6 of them to come out, and then they decide which one is going to be the queen bee.
Either that or the first one to emerge will go around and sting through the wall of the cells of all the other queens and kill them before they can emerge.
Okay, all right. So, and again, it sounds, if these things were to happen in human life, we would look at them and go, oh, this is not good. But in bee life, this is pretty normal in the way things function.
Yeah, and usually the biggest and strongest queen will emerge first, and that's the queen you want to have. You want to have kind of a big, fat, sturdy queen that's going to last for a long time.
Okay, all right. And so what happens then when you've got all these things happening? So the queen basically will leave, the old queen will leave, and then it's up to the new queens to develop out of that batch.
Yes.
Yeah, and then one stays. Well, that's interesting. Okay, so that's a swarming. Okay.
That's a swarming.
That's a swarming.
And,
all right.
And sometimes as beekeepers, we see that coming, and we think, well, we don't want to lose 60% of our bees.
Right.
That's going to be bad because we won't have much of a honey harvest, and we'll lose all these bees. And so we'll see this coming, and we'll just split the hive. We'll make sure to take the old queen when we take 5 or 6 of the frames out of a hive, put it in a different location, and then what's left will make a new queen, because they will figure the swarm has already happened, and there'll be eggs already in there that they can turn into queens.
Interesting. Wow, there's a lot to all this.
Yeah.
My guest this morning, Don Biessel, who's the president of the Joplin Area Beekeepers Association, and we're just talking about beekeeping, the nature and the life of bees, if you will. And we're going to be back after a real quick break, but we're going to take that quick break now. And like I say, stick with us, and we'll be back to talk a little bit more about the life of bees and the life of beekeepers here in the greater Joplin area. So stick around.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
Well, again, we're glad you stayed with us this morning for our show on beekeeping. My guest, Don Biessel, who's the president of the Joplin Area Beekeepers Association. So we've been talking a little bit about bees. Let's talk about the beekeepers for a few minutes. Okay. So how many people here in the greater Joplin area, and tell us how much territory you kind of take in by your area, and how many beekeepers do we have? How many hives are out there helping us keep our ecosystem going?
Well, the Joplin Area Beekeepers Association, we say that we serve an area with a 75-mile radius, which is a pretty big area. There are a lot of beekeepers that are not members of clubs, so
Sure.
it's hard to say exactly how many beekeepers are, but there are hundreds in this area. And if you start looking when you're driving around, look for those boxes along tree lines and things, and you realize there's a lot of beekeepers around. Where I live, I have bees. My immediate neighbor has bees. Somebody just around the corner has bees, and then 2 people a mile away have bees.
Now, is that? I mean, I'm guessing since you guys know what you're doing,
Yeah.
that's not oversaturating an area. That's not bad for the area, is it?
It's actually good because then there are drones that are available when it's time for your colonies to make queens, because queens will not mate with their own drones. No mating happens in the hive. The new queen, the virgin queen, flies out for up to 2 or 3 days, and she'll mate 15 to 40 times, and that way she can have 15 to 40 different genetic groups of bees in the hive, and that makes a very healthy colony that's disease resistant and helps them make and store food. So it helps with having really well mated bees. So it's a good thing to have neighbors that have bees, and there are also thousands of wild colonies in the area too.
Sure.
And sometimes
Go ahead. So I want to ask about this wild colony. So I mean,
Yeah.
so in other words, it is really important for us to all remember that the only bees that are out there are not just the ones in the nice little tended hives,
No.
but that there are actually bees that have done things in nature the same way that they always have. So,
Right.
So how would you know that there was a? I mean, you can always tell when you're coming up on a beehive once you've seen them and can recognize them. But how would you recognize something like that in the wild?
In the wild, you just see a lot of activity. They're usually going in and out of a tree that has an empty core. You know, what we see in Winnie the Pooh is a beehive. This thing hanging from the tree, those are actually
hornets'
Those
nests.
are all hornets' nests.
You don't want those.
There are some species of bees, I was reading about last night, in warm climates where they will have comb hanging, but they don't wrap it around in the paper like the wasps do. Sometimes they live in the walls and floors of people's homes.
Right, I've heard about that, where they've actually had to call people like you to come out and say, can you guys remove these for us, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I've done some of that. Some of our other members do that. So if you get a hold of the Beekeeping Association, you can probably find somebody to rescue those bees. A very important thing, if that happens, is do not try and spray insecticide in there. Your chance of killing that colony of bees, if you spray Raid or other insecticides in there, is very low because of how the nest is structured, and so you'll just coat a lot of bees with insecticide, and sometimes they will end up in other nests, or they will swarm out, and you can end up killing other bee colonies but not your target colony.
Oh gosh.
So
Okay.
it's important to have somebody come remove them, and you'll probably have to cut a hole in your floor or wall. Those things are pretty easy to fix, but if you get all that sugar out of there and all the bees and everything, then you won't get more pests. And then you can also save those bees and put them in one of those little boxes, and they can keep helping our environment.
Yeah. So how do they, so you've got, like you said, 200 beekeepers in the area, you think?
No, yeah, 2 or 3, yeah.
Okay, well that's great. So how does this all help in terms of keeping our ecosystem healthier in terms of those things? What you guys are up to and what you're doing?
We helped drive restoration of some pasture area. We had a conference last November where one of our speakers was from the state of Missouri, talking about a program where the state will give you money to help turn old farmland back into pasture. Not only for the bees, but also you can put a lot of milkweed in there so we can help out the monarch butterflies, which have been declining a lot in numbers. You know, the monarch butterflies and the bees, they are kind of barometers of what we're doing with some of our pesticides and herbicides. We have to be careful about what we do with those, otherwise we're going to lose all of our pollinators. That can make colonies collapse, and it can decrease crop yields. It drives up prices, and it makes it hard to feed everybody.
Yeah. It's interesting to me. I remember, I mean, you know, this is just a simple thing from me growing up here in Missouri. When I was a kid, you never saw birds of prey, and part of the reason for that is that we'd almost wiped out many pieces of the population of those birds of prey, which would, you know, take on, you know, mice and rodents and other, you know, things like that. And you never saw them when I was a kid because we'd done so much over spraying and, and certain pesticides that weren't good for the environment, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, and DDT when we were kids.
Oh, so many things, Yeah. I'm surprised we don't have, strange things growing out of the, side of our ears or whatever. But with all that, when you start reading about some of this, you find out that so many of those things have also happened to some of the bee populations and some of the other good insects that we like to keep around, to help with the greater thing. If we take out one section, we're in some ways messing with this whole system that, strangely works together for the greater good. And you just mentioned, the economy. You mentioned, food, being able to produce food for an area, all those things. And all these things are tied in that I don't think that sometimes we keep our eyes on or our thoughts on because, we don't want to step on that bee that was, in the clover in our lawn, when we're going barefoot.
And, we find things like if you keep bees and you're in like this ring of suburbs / rural area where deer and other things like to live, they will hang out with their fawns near beehives because they serve as kind of a protection. And that's another thing they can do. And the person who's talking about turning things back over to prairies, they say you get a lot of the wildlife back when you go from the grassland we used to use for cattle to making it back into prairie with flowers and everything. Everything shows up. The birds of prey show up, the rabbits show up, rats show up, which people don't like to hear about rats, but we have to have rats too. And it's all there when you do that. I just
don't want them in my basement, but other than
no,
that,
they're not welcome in my house, but they can be anywhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I do think it's interesting that all of us have just a general reaction to certain things. And it's just like, okay, I don't mind if that's there, but I don't want that. And unfortunately, sometimes, you got to take the good and the bad together to do some of that.
Well, we need possums and skunks and bees. There are a lot of people that have bee anxiety. I read an article that said we are actually not very good at diagnosing who is allergic to bees. A lot of people who've been told they were allergic, they got stung and they had some swelling like in their arm or hand where they got stung. That doesn't mean you're allergic. That means
you're having a natural reaction.
You had a natural reaction of the venom because you shouldn't mess with the bees. But you should always check with an allergist to see. But you may have a better opportunity to care for bees than you really think.
Interesting. Yeah, I probably got more of a phobia about skunks than I do about bees because I can smell those skunks, from a long way away. And the bees, probably in my entire life I've probably only been stung by bees themselves, maybe a handful of times.
It's the wasps that aren't very nice.
The wasps are not nice, and you certainly want to stay away from those hornets. If you see one of those little cone-like things in a tree, just give it lots and lots of space. It's kind of rough. But I was fortunate in the fact that I, even though I was the city cousin, I grew up on the farm and we were on the farms on the weekend. So I got plenty of opportunities to walk through, and the uncles would say, "You guys stay away from this area. There's a hornet's nest out there, and we're gonna." We'll figure out what we're going to do with it later, but, blah, blah, blah. So, it's just like, okay, show me what a hornet's nest is, show me so that I can stay away from it, et cetera, et cetera. But we never, nobody in my family's ever done the beekeeping thing yet, so it's interesting.
I'm surprised. You had the dad that hunted foxes.
I did.
So I'm surprised nobody in your family kept bees.
Well, my dad was an interesting fox hunter. It was an interesting thing because really, it's funny. There were so few foxes in that day that he would let the dogs go out and run. But he would get so furious if anybody ever shot or killed anything.
Well, yeah.
He would listen. He would listen to this dog chase and tell me whether they were hunting a coyote or a fox or whatever. God forbid if they got on a deer. But it was neat because I got to grow up close enough to it where I got exposed to all of it. But certainly learned how to respect it because of him. But nobody in the family, nobody on either side of the family, even though all that those farmers and all that kind of good stuff, nobody to this day and age has ever gotten into the beekeeping. So it's very interesting to me. I keep looking for an opportunity because every once in a while, we got several beekeepers in our parish. By the way, Don, I'll out him as a Catholic, but nonetheless, we got several people in the parish who are beekeepers, and I get the shall I say the fruits of the labors, a lot for Christmas or other times, and I love that part. But I keep wondering, what it'd be like to put a hive, somewhere around here, but I don't want to. Mess that up by, putting in an area and then saying, do people mess with people's hives in the city?
Sometimes teenagers do because they're teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people keep bees in town and their neighbors don't know they're there. They fly out of the hive and they go up, and bees will forage for a 3 to 5 mile radius. So they don't spend a lot of time right by the colony, except at night and in the winter. So if your neighbor has a colony, you're not at any greater risk of being stung than if you're anywhere else, really, unless you go over there and mess with the colony.
Well, we're running short on time, so tell everybody again where they'd find you all if they needed to, or if they're interested in maybe taking the classes or doing whatever. So
we're at joplinareabeekeepers.com. They're going to put that right down here.
Yeah.
And also on, I believe it's January 18th, we're going to have an outreach event at Atwood's, where we can meet with beekeepers face to face.
That'll be yesterday by the time we do this show, but
and then we're also doing it in February February 9th at the Joplin Area Greenhouse, and also another date in February at Atwood's, but I can't recall the date right now.
Okay, well,
but that will be on our website.
Okay, good. So check out the website, and we're going to be right back after this Mercy Minute.
Blessings and greetings of Mercy to you. My name is Anna Nichols. I am a Sister of Mercy and currently the leader of Heritage and Spirituality at Mercy International Association. I love the fact that sisters throughout time have gone where they have been called to go, and they have often picked up ministries that they never intended to pick up. 25 years ago, there were 22,000 Sisters of Mercy globally. Today we're down to about 6,200 with Sister Rock and some of the others. But despite the fact there are 6,500 or 6,200 sisters left, there is an amazing number of women and men of Mercy who are working alongside us, and that continues to expand and expand, and for me that is incredibly exciting. So as far as National Catholic Sisters Week, I really look at the legacy that they have passed on, and the fact that so many women, men, young people are living Mercy today. That really is for me what's significant.
Well, again, thank you for joining us for another Sunday morning of Faith in our hometown. My guest this morning was Don Biessel of the Joplin Area Beekeepers Association. It's kind of interesting that we share this large planet with these little bitty creatures that do so much to keep our system going. And that's in terms of feeding us. That's in terms of us having ready supply to food that's cheaper and easier, that succeeds here in our area. And it's there simply for the enjoyment of it. So many of us have, even in the fruits of their labors, in terms of the honey that we eat. And so many of those things are so good for us in terms of allergies and those kinds of things here in our own area. At any rate, we do so many things that we coexist, and they're an important part of our lives. Let's continue to treat all of God's creation with the respect and the dignity that it deserves. Thanks for joining us. Come back and see us again for Faith in our Hometown next week.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.